Chapter 28. The Drifts. 13 days before the Toa's descent. Takua felt a warm sensation against the side of his face as he slowly opened his eyes. He was lying beside an opened heatstone container mere inches from his head. He immediately tried to sit up, but found his movement restricted beneath a thick blanket tightly cocooning his body. He had no idea how he got there. The last thing he remembered was fighting against the cold on his way to Kokoro before collapsing into the snow. And now he was in the corner of an icy cave accompanied by a single Komatoran watching him from the other side of the chamber.
"Oh, thank the spirit,"
said the Komatoran.
"I was afraid you weren't going to wake up."
"Where am I?"
Takua asked.
"Just a few miles northeast of Kokoro, not far from where you fell."
Takua shuffled free from the blanket before realizing how sapped his energy was.
"How long ago was that?"
"You've been asleep for 3 days. I saw you right outside and dragged you in here. I've done what I can to keep you warm ever since. You're heavier than you look, by the way."
3 days? I guess that explains why I'm so hungry.
"I had a feeling you would say that,"
said the Komatoran as he stood up and walked over toward a small supply bag lying on the ground. He pulled out a slab of dried meat and handed it to Takua. Takua reached out to accept it and had already pulled down his mouth cover before even asking what it was. The first bite was enough to reveal it to be crystal climber meat, a species of rahi commonly hunted in Kauai, often said to lie somewhere between mammal and reptile. He had tried it before in the past when Komatoran traders would bring it to Takoro. Various meats were Kokoro's primary export, since Komatoran were almost exclusively carnivorous due to the harsh climate producing little vegetation.
"Who are you?"
Takua asked.
"I'm Matoro, right hand and translator for Turaga Nuju."
That explains why you look so familiar.
I suppose I'm hard to recognize when I'm not standing next to the Turaga.
Why are you out here alone?
I was on a hunting trip with the Turaga. We got separated when the snowstorm hit, and I've been holed up in here ever since. Fetching you was the only time I've left this cave in over 2 weeks.
Are the snowstorms always this bad?
Not like this. This was probably the worst one I've seen in the 100 years I've been hunting in this area. I know it's not realistic to blame every bad thing that happens on this island on Makuta, but at this point it's hard not to. It only started to let up yesterday.
Takua glanced outside the mouth of the cave.
I was almost certain I was going to die out there.
You almost did. It was bad, even for me, let alone a Komatoran. If it weren't for that heatstone, I don't think you would have made it.
Takua picked up the heatstone container, feeling the soothing heat radiate from it. The peculiar glowing stones were mined in Onuwahi in certain sections of the Lightstone Caverns and exported throughout the island. They were used to provide small amounts of warmth when building a fire was not possible. They produced only a slight glow, but were far too hot to touch, requiring them to be stored in small cylindrical containers.
"Thanks,"
Takua said.
"I owe you."
I couldn't just leave you out there.
Matoro replied.
What were you doing all this way from Takoro by yourself, anyway?
Matoro's question suddenly thrust Takua's mind back to the destroyed outpost, triggering a sudden sense of urgency.
"I have news to deliver to your Turaga. The North March has been destroyed by Makuta. All but one of the guards were killed in the attack, including one of your own."
Matoro was taken aback by the weight of the sudden and grim news.
When did this happen?
"Just before I passed out. I joined Captain Jala to investigate when he stopped getting updates from them. The whole scene was a mess. I had to make sure your people knew before they risked sending any more guards out there. The Rahi attacks are getting worse."
They must be if they're wiping out entire outposts now.
"According to the only survivor, it was done by Makuta himself, by possessing a single Rahi directly."
I've never heard of him doing anything like that before.
"I hadn't either. I guess he's changing up his tactics now that the Toa are here. The guard even claimed he heard it speak to him."
Matoro took a moment to process Takua's report.
What else have I missed while I was gone?
He said to himself.
A lot.
Takua replied.
And I can fill you in later, but we need to get to Kokoro and speak to the Turaga.
I'm ready when you are. Nuju probably thinks I'm dead by now.
Takua climbed to his feet, taking time to allow his cold and unstretched muscles to adjust to the movement. He held the heat stone container as he slung his backpack over his shoulders before following Matoro out of the cave. Matoro stopped, scanning all directions before moving forward.
Follow me,
Matoro said.
And keep that blanket over your shoulders. Your armor's gonna stand out too much out here.
The blanket was a drab gray color, which wasn't perfectly ideal for blending into the snow-covered environment of the Kauai drifts, but it would at least be a significant step up from the vibrant red that covered most of his body. He couldn't do much to hide his yellow feet or his bright blue kanohi, but he was hoping the constant snowfall would do at least a little bit of masking. Aside from his grayish-blue hands, feet, and great kanohi akaku, Matoro's armor was predominantly white, which granted a natural camouflage when traversing the region. Takua trudged behind Matoro, keeping a tight grip on the blanket that hung over his shoulders while also clutching the heat stone against his chest. His movements were heavy and slow, stomping through a thick blanket of sweeping snow that still reached halfway up his shins in even the shallowest areas. The Kauai drifts offered little to look at, save for the impressive mountains in the distance. The largely featureless whiteness spanned for miles across the sloping hills, which were beclouded by the near-constant snowstorms. Takua and Matoro hardly spoke for the duration of their journey, keeping a sharp eye out for any glowing green eyes that may be spying on them in the distance. They stopped when they stumbled across faded tracks intersecting their path. Matoro stooped down to study them, glancing back and forth from where they came from to where they were leading.
These are Muwaka tracks,
Matoro said, keeping his voice low.
It's not far from here.
So what did we do?
Takua asked, snapping his gaze in every direction.
Pray. These tracks are still visible, which means it's likely heard us already.
Matoro looked up, catching a glimpse of movement in the distance. Fearing it was the Muwaka that left the tracks, he switched on the upper telescopic lens of his akaku for a closer look. What he found were 3 silhouettes shuffling through the snow, though the storm had made identifying them difficult.
Matoro, look out!
Takua called. Matoro clicked off the telescope as he turned around to face Takua, finding a 15-foot Muwaka pouncing forward. Matoro leaped back just in time to avoid the swipe of its claws, stumbling backward and falling into the snow. Unlike the jungle species found in Liwahi, the snow Muwaka's armor was mostly white, broken up by sections of dark blue around its upper limbs and striped tail. They were the slightly larger species of Muwaka, with saber canine fangs curving downward from its mouth as well as small spiked bones protruding from its shoulders and back. They still shared many similarities, including the obtrusive green glow of their eyes. The Muwaka reared back, preparing to strike again. Matoro scrambled to his feet to avoid the second strike. While its focus was drawn to the Komatoran, Takua rushed forward, pressing the opened heat stone against the exposed organic tissue on the side of its body. The Muwaka roared in pain as the stone hissed against the bare muscle, losing its focus on Matoro as it turned to face Takua. Matoro drew a small hunting knife from his bag. The Muwaka dropped down, baring its teeth at Takua. Just before striking, the tiger-like beast was struck by a flying bolt of ice shattering against the side of its face. It turned to find the source of the attack, seeing 3 hulking figures rushing toward it. Forgetting the Matoran completely, the Muwaka bounded toward the incoming Toa. It pounced forward, swiping toward the Toa of ice, who sidestepped away before slashing its face with his blade. The Toa of stone leaped in, driving his knee against the underside of its chin before grabbing a hold of one of its protruding fangs and swinging himself onto its back. He pulled the Muaka's head upward, exposing its neck to allow the Toa of Air to swoop in and finish it off. Takua and Matoro trudged over toward the aftermath of the battle, surprised to see the Muaka was already dead before they reached it. The three towering heroes stood over its lifeless body as the Matoran approached. The Toa of Stone was the first to address them.
"Hey, Chronicler!"
Toa Pohatu said.
"Nice to run into you again."
Toa Pohatu,
Takua called as he approached the Toa, which evoked a feeling of awe he was certain he would never get used to.
Toa Liwa, and
Toa Kopaka,
Matoro said as he stepped up beside Takua.
Matoro,
said Toa Kopaka, acknowledging the Komatoran's presence.
I see you found the other Toa.
yeah.
"So, what are you two doing all the way out here?"
Pohatu asked.
we're on our way to Kokoro to speak to the Turaga.
Takua replied.
I have news to deliver.
"We're also on our way to Kokoro.
Pohatu said as he held up a rectangular stone.
Just found my last keystone fragment out here, and we're thinking about stopping there for the evening."
I suppose you wouldn't mind if we tag along?
Matoro asked as he glanced toward the dead Muaka.
We could use the extra security.
"Of course not.
Pohatu replied.
It would be a good chance to tell the chronicler here all about our journey so far."
Takua and Matoro joined the three Toa through the treacherous Kauahi drifts. Over the course of the 2-hour journey, Toa Pohatu had shared numerous tales of their adventures in searching for the keystone fragments with the help of Toa Liwa reminding him of certain details he had missed. All while the Toa of Ice had hardly said more than 2 words as he took point ahead of the group. The stories provided a nice reprieve from both the harsh climate they were forced to travel through and the disturbing image of the North March that occupied Takua's thoughts. Kokoro was built on the far western side of Kauahi, overlooking the glacier-filled sea nearby. The village itself was protected by a high wall reinforced by a 3-inch coating of ice over its surface, obscuring the cobblestone underneath, which wrapped around the entire village. The guards that stood watch at the gate remained motionless for hours prior to the group's arrival, which was apparent by the heavy layer of snow that accumulated on their shoulders. Within the village walls, the homes and shops were sturdy cabins built out of colorless logs, with steep sloping roofs that collected mounds of snow beneath them. One of the first things Takua noticed about Kokoro was how quiet it was. He heard almost no chatter among the villagers as they silently tended to their daily tasks. The most prominent sounds he heard were the soft crunching of snow beneath their steps, and the sound of firewood being chopped in the distance. Even as the Toa strolled through the village, they watched intently without saying a word. He eventually realized they appeared just as intrigued to see Matoro among them as the 3 Toa. It was likely the entire village was aware of his disappearance, and were all pleased to see him return safely. The center of the village housed the Kokoro Sanctum, an impressive temple sporting 4 cylindrical towers on each corner. It was the largest structure in Kokoro, rivaling the size of the Pokoro Koli Field. It was designed and built nearly a century ago by the famous Komatoran architect Jatiko, and contained the largest library on the island, with thousands of tomes and scrolls lining every wall. It was there that hundreds of Komatoran scholars studied and meditated every day, and where they reflected on prophecies that were shared with the community. Like most Kokoro villagers, Turaga Nuju was known to be stoic and reserved, but seeing Matoro enter the village was enough to shatter that image. Since their separation, the other Matoran had been forced to communicate with their Turaga exclusively in writing, as Matoro was the only one on the island capable of understanding his peculiar language. Even still, he had little to say during that time, as he was too focused on Matoro's safety. Upon seeing him, he rushed forward to pull him in for a tight embrace, completely ignoring the 3 Toa. After their reunion, Matoro assisted the Turaga as he briefly spoke with the Toa. Once the meeting was concluded, Toa Kopaka disappeared for the night, while Toa Pohatu and Toa Liwa spent much of the evening huddled beside the largest fire they could build outside of the Trading Guild bunkhouse. Meanwhile, Takua stayed with Matoro and the Turaga to discuss the North March situation.
I was hoping to warn you sooner,
Takua concluded.
but thanks to Matoro that I even made it here at all.
Turaga Nuju was noticeably distressed by the news of the fallen Matoran, as well as the report of the talking Rahi. He shook his head in dismay before turning toward Matoro and uttering his response in his signature bird-like language.
He's deeply saddened to hear this news,
Matoro translated.
Akko and the Takoro guards were honorable Matoran. They didn't deserve this.
I just hope we can make sense of it somehow. Why would Makuta do this?
Makuta is pure evil.
Matoro said, adding his own thoughts to the discussion.
Terrorizing Matoran is his specialty.
I know that, but this doesn't seem to be his usual style of terror.
Turaga Nuju pointed toward Takua before tapping the side of his horned noble Matatu as he made more strange noises.
He says that's the key,
Matoro continued to translate.
Acting out of character is a sign of fear. Perhaps he wasn't expecting the Toa to make it this far in their quest.
It's nice to hear Makuta being the one afraid for a change.
It is,
Nuju said through Matoro.
but Makuta is a schemer, and he is no doubt planning something in response. And while it is encouraging to know the Toa have finally swallowed their pride and begun working together, the Turaga fears it may not be enough.
Do you not believe the Toa can defeat him?
He does. He just believes they may need help.
I've seen the Toa in action. The Rahi are no match for them.
The Turaga shook his head before speaking through Matoro again.
The Rahi are nothing more than a distraction. Makuta himself is their real mission, and we can't have them distracted. He says when you return to your village, he will send you with a message to Turaga Vakama asking him to spare all Takoro guards he can to ensure the Toa reach Makuta's lair without trouble. He says he will send guards of our own. With the two militias united, they may be able to buy them the time they need.
That's an awfully big risk, Turaga.
Nuju made a peculiar sound that only his body language could reveal was a sigh.
He knows,
Matoro translated further.
and he wants to ensure that only those that volunteer may go. He won't force anyone to do this.
Takua rubbed his brainstalk as he thought about the Turaga's plan.
It's not a bad plan. I'm just worried it won't be enough.
It's all we have.
Takua paused, thinking back to all he had experienced over the last few weeks.
No, I don't think it is.
The Turaga cocked his head, hoping for Takua to elaborate.
With respect, Turaga,
Takua replied.
I believe we can get a little more ambitious.